Princess Charlotte passed the security checkpoint at exactly 4:15 that afternoon. Nothing remarkable in that. Royal youngsters navigated Kensington Palace hallways countless times daily. Only Charlotte never traveled unaccompanied. Not at her age, not without at least one protection officer maintaining respectful distance behind her. Sergeant Thomas Wright registered it instantly. 6 years protecting royals. Multiple overseas deployments before that. You cultivate instincts about what fits and what doesn't. A young princess traversing East Wing passages solo didn't fit. Charlotte moved swiftly, not sprinting. That draws attention. But her stride was measured, intentional. Head lowered, school bag clutched against her chest like armor. Wright rose from his station. "Your Royal Highness." She halted, turned. Briefly, her composure fractured. Genuine fear crossed her features. Then she reconstructed the practiced mask royal children wear. "Good afternoon, Sergeant." Her tone was controlled, rehearsed, yet her knuckles showed white gripping that bag. "Heading somewhere?" Wright kept his manner easy, casual. "Didn't notice Officer Davies accompanying you." I mentioned needing the washroom. He's waiting by the library." Plausible enough, except washrooms weren't this direction. And Charlotte knew palace layouts better than most staff working here. "The washrooms are back that way, ma'am." "Oh," she blinked. "Right, I got confused." She hadn't gotten confused. Charlotte had inhabited this palace her whole life. Wright had observed her navigate these passages dozens of times. Consistently confident, consistently certain of her route. "Want me to escort you back?" He advanced slightly. Charlotte's hand moved toward her ear. Swift, subtle, thumb to earlobe. 2 taps using her index finger. Then her hand dropped back to her bag. Wright's blood turned cold. Every royal protection officer recognized that gesture. They drilled it into the children from the moment comprehension was possible. Emergency code, nonverbal, deployed when speaking openly posed danger. "I'm threatened. Help me. But don't reveal I signaled you." He maintained neutral expression. "Actually, Your Royal Highness just remembered. Captain Wells requested a routine security sweep in the South Wing. Would you mind coming along? Protocol requires I shouldn't leave you unescorted." Relief flooded her eyes momentarily. "Naturally, Sergeant." They proceeded together. Wright maintained appropriate distance, not crowding, letting Charlotte control the pace. She moved away from the East Wing, away from wherever she'd been heading with such urgency. "Productive day at school?" he asked conversationally. It was acceptable. "Learn anything noteworthy?" "History. We're covering the Tudors." Standard small talk. Nothing unusual, except Charlotte's shoulders stayed tense. Her grip on that bag never loosened, and she kept glancing backward. Quick checks, monitoring who might be trailing. They reached the South Wing passage. Quieter here. Administrative offices had shuttered for the day. Most personnel had departed. Wright stopped near a small alcove, a semi-private area out of direct sightline from the main corridor. "Your Royal Highness," he kept his voice subdued. "Are you safe?" Charlotte's chin quivered. She caught her lip, battling something. The impulse to maintain royal composure, fighting against the instinct that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. She looked downward. "Mum always tells me if I'm frightened, I should locate a guard. Your mum's correct. You can speak with me." But she claimed, Charlotte's voice fell to barely audible. She claimed if I told anyone, Mum would face trouble, that people would be extremely angry with her. Wright crouched lower, bringing himself to Charlotte's eye level. "Who claimed that?" Charlotte's eyes brimmed with tears. She blinked them back furiously. "Queen Camilla." Before Wright could respond, footsteps resonated down the corridor. Heavy, purposeful. Charlotte's entire body went rigid. Wright felt her small frame tense beside him. Every muscle coiled like a frightened animal, preparing to bolt. He straightened slowly, positioning himself slightly between Charlotte and the approaching footsteps, making it appear casual rather than protective. His hand moved instinctively toward his radio, fingers hovering near the call button. The footsteps grew louder, echoing off the ornate walls with their gilt-framed portraits of long-dead royals who'd probably faced their own palace intrigues. Wright's training kicked in. Assess, evaluate, respond. He clocked the pace of the steps, determined, not rushed enough to appear panicked, but carrying that particular quality of someone who knew exactly where they were going and expected to find exactly what they were looking for. Charlotte's breathing had changed. Quick, shallow breaths through her nose. Her knuckles had gone from white to bloodless against that school bag. "You're safe," Wright said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. "I promise you're safe. There you are." Camilla's voice carried that distinctive blend of warmth and steel she'd perfected across years. She approached wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Charlotte, darling, we've been searching everywhere for you." Officer Davies was rather concerned. Wright noted immediately how Camilla positioned herself, blocking the corridor exit, creating a subtle barrier between Charlotte and any escape route. Professional training recognized professional tactics, even when employed by royalty. This wasn't accidental. This was calculated. Wright stood, maintaining proper protocol. "Your Majesty, I located Princess Charlotte near the East Wing." She seemed somewhat disoriented. "How peculiar." Camilla's gaze shifted to Charlotte, lingering a fraction too long. "You know these corridors perfectly well, don't you, dear?" Charlotte nodded, silent. That careful mask back in position, but her hand found Wright's sleeve, just her fingertips, barely touching. A child's instinctive reach for safety, Camilla noticed. Her eyes tracked the movement, registered the gesture, calculated its meaning. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly, the kind of micro-expression Wright had been trained to catch during hostage negotiations and threat assessments. Displeasure, irritation, something darker underneath. "Charlotte has an appointment with her music instructor in 20 minutes. We should return her to her quarters to prepare. I'll escort her personally." The music instructor. Wright ran through his mental schedule of palace activities. Tuesday afternoon. Charlotte's piano lesson wasn't until Thursday. He'd reviewed the weekly schedule that morning during briefing. Standard protocol for all protection officers to know where principals should be at any given time. Either Camilla had the schedule wrong, or she was testing whether Wright knew it well enough to catch the discrepancy. "Naturally, ma'am." Wright maintained his neutral expression. "Though, if I might suggest, Princess Charlotte mentioned Officer Davies was waiting near the library. Should I notify him first?" "That won't be necessary." Camilla extended her hand toward Charlotte. "Come along, dear." Charlotte didn't move. The silence stretched. 3 seconds. 5. It felt longer. Charlotte's fingers tightened fractionally on Wright's sleeve. Not pulling, not clinging, just maintaining that one point of contact. Her anchor. Her lifeline, Charlotte. Camilla's tone sharpened. "Just fractionally. Just enough. Your instructor is waiting." Still Charlotte didn't move. Wright could feel the tremor running through her small frame, transmitted through that light touch on his uniform. Fear. Absolute fear. Not the kind children feel before a difficult exam or a dental appointment. The kind that comes from repeated experience. From knowing what happens when you comply. The princess's fingers tightened on Wright's sleeve. Barely perceptible, but he felt it. "Actually, Your Majesty, protocol demands that I confirm Princess Charlotte's location with her assigned protection officer." Wright kept his voice respectful yet firm. "Standard procedure following any separation. I'll radio Davies now. Inform him I've located the princess and verify the pickup location with him directly." He could observe the calculation happening behind Camilla's eyes. Push back too forcefully, and it appears suspicious. But permitting Wright to contact Davies meant surrendering control of the situation. It meant witnesses, documentation, radio traffic that would be logged and time-stamped and stored in systems she couldn't access or alter. Camilla's hand dropped slightly. Not all the way, still extended toward Charlotte, but lower now. The gesture of someone reassessing their approach. "How thorough of you, Sergeant." Her smile returned, colder now, like winter sunlight on marble. "Though I do question if you're overstepping somewhat. I am escorting her after all. Simply following protocol, ma'am. I'm certain you understand." Wright met her eyes directly, not challenging, but not yielding either. Security procedures apply to everyone. The standoff lasted perhaps 3 seconds, felt longer. In Wright's peripheral vision, Charlotte remained frozen, barely breathing, waiting to see who would prevail, who would protect her, who would she be forced to go with. Then Camilla inclined her head graciously. Obviously protocol. How appropriate. Wright pulled his radio. acutely aware of Camilla's gaze, tracking every movement. "Control, this is right. I have Princess Charlotte with me in the South Wing near administrative offices, requesting immediate location confirmation of Officer Davies and proper handoff protocol." The radio crackled with static. "Right, this is Control. Davies reports Princess Charlotte should be in her quarters preparing for her music lesson. He's been waiting there 10 minutes. Stand by." Camilla's jaw tightened, just barely, a muscle jumping near her temple, visible only for an instant before she controlled it. "There appears to be some confusion," she said smoothly. "Charlotte was with me, reviewing her schedule for tomorrow's engagement. Davies must have misunderstood, but her eyes told a different story. They'd gone flat, emotionless, the look of someone whose plans were unraveling, and who was rapidly formulating alternatives. Wright had seen that expression before, on suspects in interrogation rooms, on hostile actors during security sweeps, on people who'd been caught in a lie and were deciding whether to double down or retreat. "Control," Wright continued, his voice steady, requesting Captain Wells for immediate consultation. "Sergeant Wright," Camilla's voice dropped. "No more warmth, no more pretense. You're manufacturing a situation from nothing. Release Princess Charlotte to me immediately. With respect, Your Majesty, until I have confirmation from Captain Wells, or Princess Charlotte's primary protection officer, I'm required to maintain visual contact with her." The air felt thick, charged with unspoken conflict. Camilla took a step forward, then another. She was taller than Wright by 2 inches, and she used the height now, looking down at him with an expression that blended authority, irritation, and something that might have been genuine anger. "Now, make certain you hit subscribe on Crown Watch. Drop a comment below indicating where you're watching from. We want to hear from you." Charlotte's hand hadn't left Wright's sleeve. That single small gesture communicated everything he needed to know about whose authority actually mattered in this moment. Not the crown, not the protocol, not the centuries of tradition that said he should defer to royalty without question. A child's safety. That was the only authority that counted. Camilla stepped closer, close enough that Wright could smell her perfume, something expensive and subtle that probably cost more than his monthly salary. Her voice dropped further, intimate, threatening. "Sergeant, I'm going to offer you some friendly counsel. You're new to palace service. You don't comprehend how things function here yet. Some situations require discretion. You're creating a problem where none exists. Think very carefully about your next move." New to palace service. 6 years protecting royals wasn't new by any reasonable standard, but Wright understood the tactic. Diminish his experience. Frame him as inexperienced, overeager, misunderstanding sophisticated dynamics he couldn't grasp. Make him doubt his own judgment. "I appreciate the counsel, ma'am." Wright's hand moved subtly, positioning himself slightly between Camilla and Charlotte. "But my duty is to Princess Charlotte's safety. Nothing else factors into that equation. Your duty?" Camilla's laugh was sharp, cold. "Let me clarify your duty, Sergeant. Your duty is to the crown, to the king, to the continuity of the royal family, not to a child who's frightened because she received scolding for misbehaving." The mask had slipped further now. The carefully cultivated image of the benevolent step-grandmother, the modern royal who balanced tradition with approachability. It was cracking. Beneath it, Wright glimpsed something harder, more calculating, the kind of person who'd navigated decades of public scrutiny and private scandal, who'd weathered storms that would have destroyed lesser players, who'd clawed her way to a position she'd never been born to and had no intention of relinquishing. "Is that what occurred, Your Majesty?" Wright asked, his tone carefully neutral. Princess Charlotte was scolded, the question suspended in the air, too direct, potentially insubordinate, but Wright needed to know. Needed Camilla to commit to a version of events that could later be verified or disproven. Camilla's expression hardened into something resembling marble, beautiful, cold, immovable. "What occurred is none of your concern. You will hand Princess Charlotte over to me immediately, or I will have you removed from palace service before sunset. Do I make myself clear?" "Crystal clear, ma'am." Wright held her gaze, not aggressive but not yielding, and my answer remains unchanged. "I follow proper protocol, For a moment, Wright thought Camilla might actually try to physically take Charlotte. Her hand moved, reached toward the princess. Charlotte flinched, a full-body reaction, instinctive and immediate. She pressed against Wright's leg, making herself smaller, her breathing rapid and shallow. That flinch told Wright everything. Children who'd simply been scolded didn't react that way. Children who'd been frightened repeatedly, systematically, did. The radio crackled again. "Wright, this is Captain Wells. What's your situation?" Before Wright could respond, Camilla reached for Charlotte's arm. Not gently, not with the grandmotherly warmth she projected in public. Her fingers closed around Charlotte's wrist, with the grip of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Come along, Charlotte." Now Charlotte jerked back, instinctive, frightened, the reaction of a child who'd learned that compliance led to unpleasant consequences. She pressed closer to Wright, her small frame trembling. "Captain Wells," Wright spoke into the radio, never taking his eyes off Camilla. "I need you in the South Wing Administrative Corridor immediately. We have a situation requiring senior command authority. On my way." 2 minutes. Those 2 minutes stretched like hours. Camilla didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there radiating cold fury. The air felt electric, crackling with unspoken conflict. Charlotte remained frozen at Wright's side, her small hand still gripping his uniform sleeve, like it was the only solid thing in a world suddenly gone unstable. Wright's mind raced through possibilities, through scenarios and outcomes. He'd just defied direct orders from the Queen Consort. He'd essentially accused her of threatening a child. If he was wrong, if Charlotte had simply misunderstood something, if there was a reasonable explanation he was missing, his career was finished. Not just this position, any position. You didn't cross royalty and walk away unscathed, but he wasn't wrong. Every instinct, cultivated through years of protection work, through combat zones and threat assessments, and reading human behavior in high-stakes situations, all of it screamed that something fundamental was wrong here, that Charlotte's fear was real, that Camilla's insistence on taking custody was about control, not concern. He thought back through recent weeks, details he'd noted but not fully processed. Charlotte had been different lately, quieter during palace events, less animated. At last month's garden party, she'd stayed close to her mother, uncharacteristically clingy for a child who usually engaged confidently with guests. 2 weeks ago, she'd suddenly become ill right before a scheduled photo opportunity with the king and queen. Illness that resolved mysteriously within hours once the event was cancelled. And there were the routes. Charlotte had started taking longer paths through the palace, avoiding certain corridors. Wright had noticed, but attributed it to childhood whims. Now those detours reformed into a pattern, routes that avoided Camilla's usual haunts, the Queen Consort's office, the East drawing room where she took her afternoon tea, the portrait gallery she favored for private phone calls. Charlotte had been avoiding her, systematically, deliberately. Captain Richard Wells appeared at the corridor's end. 46 years old, 23 years in royal service, a man who'd witnessed every kind of palace drama imaginable. His face remained professionally neutral as he approached, but Wright saw his eyes absorbing the scene in quick, efficient assessment. The careful distance Wright maintained from Camilla, Charlotte's obvious distress, Camilla's barely controlled anger, the positioning of all three, Wright between the princess and the Queen Consort, Charlotte using him as a shield. Wells was a veteran. He read situations the way other people read newspapers. "Your Majesty." Wells gave a respectful nod. "Sergeant Wright." "Princess Charlotte." His gaze lingered on the princess, taking in her tear-streaked face, her white-knuckled grip on Wright's sleeve, her shallow breathing. "Can someone explain what's happening?" Camilla spoke first, her voice regaining some of its warmth. The professional royal, accustomed to controlling narratives. "Your sergeant has decided to ignore a direct order from a member of the royal family. I'm escorting Princess Charlotte to her music lesson. He refuses to permit her to come with me." "I see." Wells turned to Wright, his expression carefully neutral. "Sergeant?" "Sir, Princess Charlotte gave me an emergency signal." Wright kept his voice level, professional, stating facts without emotion. "She indicated she was in danger." When Queen Camilla attempted to take custody of her, the princess showed clear signs of distress. I determined the situation required senior command authority before proceeding. Wells's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of something that might have been concern, or recognition, or grim understanding. He'd been doing this job long enough to know what emergency signals meant, long enough to understand that royal children didn't give them lightly. Princess Charlotte, Wells's voice was gentle now, almost paternal. Did you give Sergeant Wright an emergency signal? Charlotte looked at Camilla, then at Wells, then down at her shoes. Her lips moved, but no sound emerged. The weight of royal protocol, of family obligation, of whatever Camilla had told her in those private sessions, all of it pressed down on her small shoulders. I didn't intend to cause trouble. Her voice was barely audible, thick with tears she was fighting to control. You're not in trouble, Your Royal Highness. Wells crouched down, bringing himself to Charlotte's eye level. But I need to know. Did you signal Sergeant Wright that you were in danger? Silence. 3 seconds. 5. 10. Charlotte's hand tightened on Wright's sleeve, her knuckles showing white against the dark fabric. Her breathing was rapid, shallow, on the verge of hyperventilating. Answer Captain Wells, Charlotte. Camilla's voice was sweet. Too sweet, like honey laced with poison. Tell him you were confused. Tell him you made a mistake. The suggestion hung in the air. An escape route. A way to make all of this go away. To restore the comfortable fiction that everything was fine. All Charlotte had to do was lie. Say she'd misunderstood. Say she'd made a mistake. Return to whatever normal had been before this moment. Wright felt her trembling against his leg. Felt the war happening inside her. The trained impulse to comply. To smooth things over. To be a good princess warring against the fundamental truth that she was frightened and needed help. Your Majesty, Wells said quietly, his tone respectful but firm. I need to hear from Princess Charlotte directly without prompting. This is absurd. Camilla's composure was cracking visibly now, anger bleeding through the carefully maintained mask. I'm her step-grandmother. I was taking her to her lesson. This sergeant has manufactured a crisis out of Charlotte. Wells kept his focus on the princess, ignoring Camilla's interruption. Look at me, please. Charlotte lifted her eyes. They were swimming with tears she was fighting desperately to control, with fear and hope, and something that might have been desperate prayer, that someone would finally see, finally understand, finally help. Did you give the emergency signal? A tiny nod. Almost imperceptible, but there. Clear. Undeniable. Why? Charlotte's voice was barely audible. I'm scared. Of what? Of? Charlotte glanced at Camilla, saw the warning in her eyes, saw the promise of consequences if she spoke. But something in Wells's gentle expression, in Wright's protective presence, gave her courage. Of making Mum angry. Of getting her in trouble. Your mother isn't going to be angry with you, Wells said firmly, with absolute conviction. I promise. What are you afraid of? But Charlotte shook her head. She'd reached her limit. Whatever she was holding inside, whatever Camilla had done or said or threatened, she couldn't say it here. Not with the queen consort watching. Not with the weight of protocol and family obligation and royal duty crushing down on her. Wells stood slowly, his jaw set in a way that Wright recognized. Decision made. Line drawn. There would be no compromise now. No diplomatic solution that made everyone comfortable. There would only be doing what was right, regardless of consequences. Your Majesty, I'm going to need to conduct a formal security inquiry. Wells's voice carried absolute authority now. Not aggressive, but immovable. Standard procedure when a protected royal gives an emergency signal. I'll need to interview Princess Charlotte, privately with her parents present. On what authority? Camilla's voice was ice now, all pretense of warmth gone. On what authority do you presume to investigate anything involving my family? On the authority of royal protection protocols, established by His Majesty and the Metropolitan Police, Wells replied evenly. The same authority that governs every member of this security detail. These protocols exist precisely for situations like this. Situations like what? Camilla stepped forward, her voice rising slightly. A confused child? An overzealous guard? A protected royal indicating she's in danger. Wells didn't retreat, didn't soften. "This isn't negotiable, Your Majesty. We'll see about that." Camilla pulled out her phone, her fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. "I'm calling the king. This has gone far enough." "Please do, ma'am." Wells's calm was absolute. "While you're making that call, I'm taking Princess Charlotte to the secure family quarters and contacting Princess Kate immediately." Camilla's finger hovered over her phone. For just a moment, something like panic flickered across her face. Genuine fear that control was slipping away, that this situation couldn't be managed or contained or smoothed over with the usual tools of influence and authority. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "You're making a terrible mistake, Captain. A terrible mistake. Both of you. This will not end well for you. Perhaps." Wells's expression didn't change. "But if I'm wrong, the only consequence is minor inconvenience and some uncomfortable conversations. If I'm right and I do nothing." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Then I've failed in the most fundamental duty I have. I'll take that risk. Come along, Princess Charlotte. Sergeant Wright will accompany us." As they walked away, Wright heard Camilla's voice behind them, already on the phone. "Charles, darling, we have a situation. It's about Charlotte. I'm worried there's been some sort of misunderstanding with the guards. They're being quite difficult." Her voice carried that particular tone of aggrieved reasonableness. The victim of overzealous security, the concerned family member, trying to do the right thing and being thwarted by procedural nonsense. She was already constructing the narrative, establishing her version of events. But they were already gone, moving quickly through the corridor toward the family wing. Charlotte walked between Wells and Wright now, still trembling, but with something like relief beginning to show in her posture. She'd taken the risk, she'd spoken, and she hadn't been punished for it. Not yet. What Wright didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that this was just the beginning. The story Charlotte would tell her mother in less than an hour would set off a chain reaction that would reach all the way to Princess Anne, to private meetings behind closed doors, to questions that demanded answers, and to a reckoning that was long overdue. The family quarters felt different from the rest of Kensington Palace. Less formal, lived in. Children's artwork on the walls, crayon, drawings of the family, construction paper collages, a watercolor that might have been meant to represent the palace gardens. Photographs in simple frames showed genuine moments rather than official portraits. A pair of small Wellington boots sat by the door, mud still clinging to the soles from some recent outdoor adventure. A jacket hung on a hook at child height. This was home, not museum. The contrast was stark after the formal corridors, the gilt-framed ancestral portraits, the heavy atmosphere of centuries of tradition. Here, life happened. Messy, genuine, human life. Kate appeared within 5 minutes of Wells's call. She'd been in a meeting at the National Portrait Gallery, 15 minutes away. She must have dropped everything, made some quick excuse, and driven directly here. Her face was composed when she entered, the practiced serenity of someone who'd spent years learning to control her public expression. But Wright saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched briefly at her sides before she consciously relaxed them, the way her eyes immediately found Charlotte, scanning for injury, for obvious distress, for any sign of what kind of emergency had pulled her from her engagement. "Mummy." Charlotte's careful composure finally shattered completely. She ran to her mother, buried her face in Kate's jacket, and began crying in earnest now, the kind of sobbing that comes from a child who's been holding everything in for too long and finally feels safe enough to release it. Kate held her daughter, one hand stroking Charlotte's hair, the other wrapped protectively around her small frame. Her eyes moved to Wells. A silent question, urgent and afraid. "Ma'am," Wells kept his voice low, respectful. "Princess Charlotte gave Sergeant Wright an emergency distress signal approximately 30 minutes ago. Queen Camilla attempted to take custody of her immediately afterward, despite the sergeant's request to follow standard protocol. Charlotte showed clear signs of fear. We felt the situation warranted immediate parental notification." Kate's expression didn't change, but her arms tightened around Charlotte. Her jaw set in a way Wright recognized. The look of a mother who'd just been told her child was threatened, and was rapidly shifting from composed professional to protective parent. "Where is my husband?" Her voice was calm, steady, but Wright heard the steel underneath. The carefully controlled fury of someone holding back an eruption through sheer force of will. "Prince William is at an engagement in Birmingham. We've contacted his security detail. He's en route back. ETA 45 minutes. Good." Kate's voice remained calm, controlled, but there was something in her eyes now, something fierce and unyielding. "Gentlemen, would you wait outside, please? I need to speak with my daughter privately." "Of course, ma'am." Wright and Wells stepped into the corridor. The door closed with a soft click, sealing Charlotte and Kate in private space, where royal protocol didn't apply, where mother and daughter could speak, without the weight of duty and image management, and centuries of tradition pressing down on every word. Through the thick wood, they couldn't hear specific words, but they heard Charlotte crying, really crying now, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere fundamental, somewhere that had been locked down and compressed for weeks. The sound of a child who'd been carrying a burden too heavy for small shoulders, and was finally allowed to set it down. Wells leaned against the wall, his face showing the strain of 30 years in protection work. He'd seen things during his career, threats from outside, security breaches, genuine dangers to the people he'd sworn to protect. But threats from inside, from family, from people who should have been trusted, those were different. Harder to identify, harder to stop, harder to process afterward. "You did the right thing," he said quietly, not looking at Wright. "Did I?" Wright kept his voice equally low. "Camilla threatened my career. If I'm wrong, if there's some explanation we're missing, you're not wrong." Wells's certainty was absolute. He finally looked at Wright directly. "I've seen scared children before, more times than I'd like. That wasn't confusion. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That wasn't a child who'd been scolded for misbehaving. That was genuine fear, systematic fear, the kind that comes from repeated negative experiences." "Of what, though? What could Camilla have done? She's what? Royal?" Wells's voice carried an edge of bitterness. "You think royalty makes someone incapable of cruelty? Of manipulation? Of making a child feel small and frightened and responsible for problems she didn't create? No, sir. Wright struggled for words. "I thought we'd see it. Someone would notice. Someone did notice." "You noticed." Wells pushed off from the wall. "The question is what happens now, whether the system protects Charlotte or protects the image of family unity." They waited. Minutes stretched. The sounds from inside the room eventually quieted, the storm of Charlotte's tears subsiding into occasional hiccups and sniffles. The low murmur of Kate's voice, soothing and steady. The kind of conversation that couldn't be rushed, couldn't be abbreviated, had to unfold at its own necessary pace. Wright's mind kept replaying the scene in the corridor. Camilla's cold threat. Charlotte's trembling hand on his sleeve. That emergency signal. 2 taps to the earlobe, casual enough to miss if you weren't watching for it. Unmistakable if you knew what it meant. The door opened. Kate stood there. Her face was pale, completely drained of color, looking almost translucent in the afternoon light filtering through the window behind her. Her hands were shaking slightly before she clasped them together, the knuckles showing white from the pressure. "Captain Wells, I need you to document everything that happened today." Her voice was controlled but tight, like someone speaking through clenched teeth. "Every detail. Times, locations, exact words spoken. I want a formal report on my desk within 2 hours." "Yes, ma'am, Sergeant Wright." Kate's eyes met his directly, and he saw something in them that hadn't been there before. Fury, absolute fury, barely contained. "Thank you. What you did today," her voice caught. She steadied herself, visibly pulling composure back together. "Thank you, ma'am." "If I may ask," Wright hesitated, uncertain if he was overstepping. "What happened?" Kate was quiet for a long moment. Professional protocol dictated that she didn't owe explanations to guards. They weren't confidants, they weren't counselors. They were security personnel who needed operational information, nothing more. But the man standing in front of her had protected her daughter when it mattered most, had risked his career to keep Charlotte safe, had chosen courage over convenience. He'd earned more than professional courtesy. Charlotte's been afraid to tell us something for weeks now, Kate said finally, her voice tight. She thought. Kate's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping near her temple. She thought if she spoke up, we'd be angry with her, that she'd cause problems for the family, that it was her responsibility to keep quiet and keep everyone happy. She's 8 years old, ma'am. Wright didn't mean to speak, but the words came anyway. Yes, she's 8 years old, and someone told her that. Kate's voice was ice now, each word precisely articulated. Someone made my 8-year-old daughter believe she had to stay silent about being frightened and uncomfortable to protect us, to protect the family image, to be a good princess. Wright felt his stomach drop. Camilla? Among other things, yes. Kate's expression was carved from stone. This conversation isn't over. Not by a long shot. I'm calling Anne. Wells straightened slightly. Princess Anne, ma'am? Anne handles situations that require. Kate chose her words with visible care. Direct action without palace politics interfering. She'll know what to do. She won't care about managing the image or smoothing things over or preserving relationships. She'll care about the truth. And right now, the truth is what we need. She was right, of course. Princess Anne had a reputation that preceded her like a force of nature. No nonsense. Brutally honest. Completely uninterested in image management or careful diplomatic phrasing. If something needed confronting, Anne confronted it. Hard. Without apology. Without compromise. I'll make the call now, Kate said. Stay with Charlotte, please. No one gets near her without my explicit permission. And I mean no one. I don't care who they are or what authority they claim. No one. Understood, ma'am. The door closed again. Wells pulled out his phone immediately, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. I'm getting the security logs. Camera footage from every corridor Charlotte traveled through today. Radio transcripts. Everything. Wright nodded. His adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by the reality of what he'd done settling in like cold weight in his stomach. He'd essentially accused the queen consort of threatening a child, of systematic manipulation, of making an 8-year-old feel unsafe in her own home. If he was wrong, if Charlotte had simply misunderstood innocent conversations, if there was context he was missing, his career was finished. Not just this position, any protection position, possibly any security position anywhere. You didn't accuse royalty of abuse and walk away professionally unscathed. But he wasn't wrong. Every instinct said so. Charlotte's fear had been too genuine, too visceral. Children didn't fake that kind of reaction, didn't give emergency signals over misunderstandings. 20 minutes later, Prince William arrived. Wright had seen him countless times, at events, in corridors, during routine protection details. Usually Prince William maintained perfect royal composure in public, professional, controlled, the image of modern monarchy, accessible but dignified, warm but proper. Today was different. Walking through that corridor toward the family quarters, William looked like any other father who'd been told his daughter was in trouble. His face was tight, his stride purposeful, his eyes hard. He didn't acknowledge Wright or Wells, didn't slow down, walked straight into the quarters like a man on a mission. The door closed behind him with more force than necessary. Not quite a slam, but close. More waiting. The afternoon light shifted, throwing long shadows across the corridor. Wright's radio crackled occasionally with normal palace traffic. Shift changes. Routine checks. Maintenance reporting a blocked drain in the East Wing. Someone requesting permission to access the secure storage areas. The ordinary business of the palace carrying on as usual, oblivious to the fact that something fundamental was breaking apart behind that door. Wells's phone buzzed. He read the message, his expression darkening, then turned the screen toward Wright. Security footage from earlier in the day. Timestamp 3:47 p.m. East Wing corridor. Wright watched the silent video. Charlotte walked quickly through an empty corridor. Alone, her school bag clutched against her chest. Her head swiveled occasionally, checking behind her. The behavior of someone who knew she was being followed or feared she might be. Behind her at a distance, Camilla appeared. Not obviously pursuing, maintaining enough distance to appear coincidental if challenged. But there, watching, matching Charlotte's pace, turning when Charlotte turned. Charlotte stopped at a corridor intersection, looked back, saw Camilla. Her body language changed instantly, visibly even through grainy security footage. Shoulders hunched forward, head dropping, making herself smaller. She turned away from wherever she'd been heading and went in a different direction, away from Camilla, trying to escape. Camilla followed, still maintaining that careful distance. Still watching, the footage cut to another camera. Timestamp 3:52 p.m. Different corridor. Camilla had caught up with Charlotte near the library. They were close now, Camilla leaning down to speak directly to Charlotte. The angle didn't capture Camilla's face clearly, but Charlotte's expression was completely visible. Fear, clear and undeniable. The wide eyes, the frozen posture, the slight backward lean, as if trying to create distance without being obvious about it. Camilla spoke, her lips moving, words lost to the silent footage. She gestured with one hand, palm down, the universal gesture for calm down, lower your voice, don't make a scene. Her other hand moved to Charlotte's shoulder. Charlotte flinched. Barely, but it was there. A full-body micro-reaction, instinctive and immediate. The flinch of someone who'd learned that physical contact from this person sometimes preceded something unpleasant. Camilla's hand remained on Charlotte's shoulder. She leaned closer, her mouth near Charlotte's ear, speaking directly into it. Private words, intimate, inaudible. Whatever she said made Charlotte's shoulders slump in visible defeat. The princess nodded slowly. Agreement, or compliance, or simply acknowledgement that she'd heard and understood. The body language of a child who'd just been given instructions she didn't want to follow, but felt powerless to resist. Camilla straightened, smiled, patted Charlotte's shoulder, a gesture that looked affectionate, almost grandmotherly, if you didn't know the context, if you hadn't seen what came before, if you couldn't read the tension in Charlotte's frame, the way she held herself rigid under that touch. Then Camilla walked away. Charlotte remained frozen for several seconds, watching her go. Then the princess looked around, checking if anyone had witnessed the exchange, before heading in the opposite direction, away from wherever Camilla had told her to go. Jesus, Wells muttered, his voice rough. There's more, Wright said, pointing at the timestamp. That's 5 minutes before I saw Charlotte near the guard station. She was heading away from whatever Camilla told her to do, actively disobeying. That's why she was so frightened when she saw me. She thought I was going to make her comply. Brave kid. Wells replayed the footage, watching Charlotte's defiant choice to walk in the opposite direction. 8 years old, and she knew something was wrong enough to refuse. Knew enough to run. The door opened. William stepped out. His face was a careful mask, but his eyes blazed with barely contained fury. His hands were clenched at his sides, and there was a rigidity to his posture that spoke of someone exercising iron control over volcanic rage. Captain Wells, his voice was quiet, deadly quiet. The kind of quiet that was more threatening than shouting. I need your full security team assembled immediately. Full review of all interactions between Queen Camilla and my children over the past 6 weeks. Every recorded conversation, every public appearance, every private meeting logged by security. I want it all documented and analyzed, sir. That level of investigation. Wells hesitated. The king will need to authorize. I don't care. William's voice remained quiet, but developed an edge like broken glass. My daughter was threatened. My daughter was manipulated. Someone made her afraid in her own home. Made her believe her feelings didn't matter, that her discomfort was less important than preserving appearances. I want to know everything, every interaction, every moment. And I want it now. Yes, sir. William turned to Wright. You were the one Charlotte signaled? Yes, sir. And Camilla tried to take her anyway? Even after you explained protocol? She insisted, sir, quite forcefully. She indicated that I was overstepping my authority and creating problems where none existed. William nodded slowly, his jaw working as he processed this. You'll be getting calls. Pressure from certain quarters to downplay this, to reconsider your statement. Possibly threats about your position here. You'll be told you misunderstood the situation, that you overreacted, that you've caused unnecessary disruption. He paused, his eyes boring into Wright's. Ignore all of it, every word. You did your job exactly right. You protected my daughter when she needed protection. You're under my protection now. Whatever comes next, whatever pressure gets applied, you have my full support. Understood? Understood, sir. What everyone was about to discover would change everything. But first, Princess Anne needed to arrive, and when Anne got involved, there would be no more polite maneuvering, no more careful palace politics, no more diplomatic solutions that satisfied everyone and resolved nothing. There would only be the truth. Continuing to next segment, Princess Anne's car pulled up to Kensington Palace at 6:30 p.m. She didn't use the main entrance. That would have drawn attention, created a spectacle, turned her arrival into an event that palace staff would gossip about. Instead, she came through the private family access, the discreet entrance used when royals wanted to move, without fanfare. That was Anne's way. Direct, efficient. No performance. Wright heard her before he saw her. Clipped footsteps echoing down the corridor. The determined pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going and why, who had no time for obstacles or delays. Each step carried purpose, authority, the sound of someone who'd spent 7 decades navigating palace politics and had exactly zero patience for nonsense. She rounded the corner with Captain Wells beside her, already being briefed, her face set in an expression Wright recognized from news footage. The look Anne wore when confronting difficult situations. No pleasantries, no social niceties, just direct engagement with whatever needed addressing. Attempted to physically remove Princess Charlotte despite the sergeant's objection, Wells was saying as they approached. Made explicit threats regarding his career when he refused to comply. Where's Charlotte now? With her parents. Ma'am, good. Show me the footage. They moved to a nearby security office, a small room lined with monitors and recording equipment. Wright followed, uncertain if he should but unwilling to leave without clear dismissal. Anne gestured him in without looking back, the kind of casual authority that didn't need to be verbalized. You're right? The one who stopped her? Yes. Ma'am, good instincts. She turned to the monitor. All business. Play it. Wells pulled up the earlier footage. The timestamp in the corner read 3:47 p.m. Anne watched in silence as Charlotte walked alone through the corridor, as Camilla followed, as the distance between them closed. Her expression didn't change, but Wright saw her hands tighten on the edge of the desk. The footage continued. Charlotte looking back, seeing Camilla, changing direction, Camilla following. The meeting near the library. The conversation. Charlotte's visible fear. When the footage showed Charlotte flinching from Camilla's touch, Anne's jaw set hard. Play that part again. Wells replayed it once, twice, 3 times. Anne leaned forward, watching Charlotte's body language with the focused attention of someone who knew what they were looking at, who understood the language of fear and control, of power imbalances and manipulation. That's not a child who's misbehaved, Anne said finally, her voice flat and certain. That's a child who's been intimidated, systematically, over time. Children don't develop that kind of fear response from a single incident. She straightened, turning to Wells. Where is Camilla now? In her private quarters, ma'am. She called the king immediately after the incident. We believe she's been on the phone with him for the past 2 hours. Annie's expression was grim. Of course she has. Getting her version established first. Framing the narrative before anyone else can speak. That's how she operates. That's how she's always operated. She turned to Wright. Tell me exactly what she said to you, word for word. Wright recounted the conversation, drawing from the training that taught perfect recall of confrontations. Camilla's threats, her insistence that he was overstepping, her warning about discretion and understanding how things worked, her implication that his judgment was flawed, his experience inadequate, his intervention unwelcome. Anne listened without interrupting, her face betraying nothing. When Wright finished, she was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, she threatened your career. Yes, ma'am. Explicitly. Said I'd be removed from palace service before sunset if I didn't comply. And you stood your ground anyway. Charlotte gave me an emergency signal, ma'am. Wright met her eyes directly. Nothing else mattered after that. A protected royal indicated danger. Everything else, career concerns, social hierarchy, who had more authority, became irrelevant. My duty was clear. Anne nodded, something like approval flickering in her eyes. Right answer. Here's what's going to happen now. Her voice took on the quality of someone issuing orders that would be followed without question. I'm going to speak with Charlotte myself. Get her account directly, without it being filtered through anyone else's interpretation. Then I'm going to speak with my brother. And then, her expression hardened. I'm going to have a conversation with Camilla. Wells straightened slightly. Captain Wells, I want every member of Charlotte's protection detail interviewed. Everyone who's been on her security rotation in the past 2 months. If this has been ongoing, someone else must have noticed something. Small things. Changes in behavior. Avoidance patterns. I want all of it documented. Ma'am, that's going to create significant disruption to normal operations. I don't care about normal operations. Anne's eyes flashed, her voice sharp as glass. I care about a child who was frightened enough to give a distress signal to a guard she barely knows because she didn't feel safe in her own home. I care about systematic manipulation of an 8-year-old. Normal operations can be disrupted. They'll survive. Make it happen. Yes, ma'am. Annie headed toward the family quarters, her stride purposeful. She knocked once, courtesy, not permission-seeking. Kate opened the door. The two women exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Years of understanding, shared experiences of navigating royal life as women who'd married in rather than being born to it. The particular bond that came from loving people within this strange institution while maintaining enough objectivity to see its flaws clearly. She'll talk to you, Kate said quietly. She trusts you. Anne entered. The door closed. Wright waited in the corridor again. He was exhausted now. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the confrontation with Camilla long since faded. His body ached with the kind of weariness that came after high-stress situations, when your muscles finally released tension they'd been holding for hours. But he couldn't leave. Not yet. This wasn't finished. His radio crackled. Control room to Wright. You have a visitor at the main security desk. Says it's urgent. Who is it? Palace Administration. Mr. Jeffrey Sterling, the King's private secretary. Wright's stomach sank. This was it. The pressure William had warned him about. Sterling was one of the most powerful people in the palace bureaucracy. The man who managed the King's schedule, filtered information, controlled access, shaped narratives. If Camilla wanted Wright removed, Sterling would be the one to execute it. Professionally, cleanly, with all the proper paperwork and justified reasoning. Tell him I'm currently assigned to close protection duty and unavailable. A pause. He says he'll wait. Let him wait. Wright's voice was steady. I'm not leaving my post. Wells gave him an approving nod. They're going to try everything to make this go away quietly. Apply pressure where they think you're vulnerable. Off are compromises that sound reasonable but sacrifice Charlotte's safety for everyone's comfort. Don't let them. Inside the quarters, Anne was speaking with Charlotte. Wright couldn't hear the words. The doors were too thick, the walls too well insulated. But the tone was clear, gentle but firm, patient but direct. Anne had a gift for talking to children without condescension. She treated them like small adults who deserved straight answers, who could handle difficult truths if they were presented honestly. The conversation lasted 40 minutes, longer than Wright expected. Long enough that the afternoon light had shifted completely, throwing the corridor into shadow. Long enough that his back started to ache from standing. Long enough that whatever Charlotte was sharing required time and space and careful, patient listening. When Anne emerged, her expression was carved from granite. Not angry. Anger was too hot, too reactive. This was something colder, more dangerous. The look of someone who'd heard something that confirmed their worst suspicions and was now calculating the precise response required. Kate, William, a word. She gestured them out into the corridor, her voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. Charlotte's told me everything. Anne's voice was controlled, each word precisely articulated. This goes back 6 weeks. Multiple incidents. A pattern of behavior designed to undermine Charlotte's confidence and make her doubt her own judgment. Camilla has been. She paused, choosing words with visible care. Aware guards were present, exercising inappropriate authority, making Charlotte feel personally responsible for family unity. telling her that speaking up would cause problems, damage relationships, hurt her parents. Kate's face went white, blood draining visibly. 6 weeks. This has been happening for 6 weeks and she didn't tell us? She was protecting you, Anne said bluntly, because someone convinced her. That's what good royal children do. Stay quiet. Don't make waves. Accept whatever treatment they receive, because the family image matters more than their well-being. That their feelings are secondary to preserving appearances. William's fists clenched at his sides, his knuckles going white. Where did she learn that? We've never taught. From Camilla. Anne's voice was flat, factual, devastating, repeatedly. Camilla has been positioning herself as Charlotte's mentor, teaching her about royal duty, about proper behavior, about what's expected of princesses. But the lessons have been, she paused again, problematic, focused less on genuine guidance and more on compliance, on accepting authority without question, on prioritizing others' comfort over her own safety. What happened today? Kate's voice was barely a whisper. What finally made her run? Charlotte refused to follow an instruction, Anne explained. Something about an appearance Camilla wanted her to make, some photo opportunity or event. Charlotte said no, said she didn't want to. Camilla didn't take it well. What did she do? William's voice was tight, dangerous, cornered her in the East Wing. Anne's recounting was clinical, precise, told her that disobedience has consequences. That princess or not, children who don't listen create problems for everyone around them. That if Charlotte couldn't be trusted to behave properly, perhaps she wasn't ready for public duties at all. And wouldn't that disappoint her parents? Wouldn't that make everything harder for the family? The corridor went silent. Even the ambient palace sounds seemed to fade. The distant footsteps, the humming ventilation, the soft sounds of a building this size existing. Everything stopped. That's emotional manipulation, William said finally. His voice was quiet, steady, but Wright heard the fury underneath. Volcanic rage held in check by sheer force of will, of a child. Systematic psychological manipulation of an 8-year-old child. Yes, Anne agreed simply. It is, and it stops now. Charles won't want to hear this. Kate's voice was tight, strained. He'll think we're attacking Camilla, that we're undermining his marriage, that we're causing family conflict over nothing. I don't care what Charles wants to hear. Anne pulled out her phone, her movements decisive. He's going to hear it anyway, whether he wants to or not. I'm calling him now. He's going to meet with me, with you two, and with Camilla tonight. Here. And we're going to have a conversation that's decades overdue. She dialed, waited. Her face remained impassive, giving nothing away. Charles, it's Anne. I'm at Kensington Palace. We need to talk. Tonight. It's about Charlotte. A pause. Wright couldn't hear the other end of the conversation, but he could imagine it. Confusion, concern, probably irritation at the interruption, at the lack of proper notice, at being summoned rather than consulted. Yes, I know Camilla called you. Anne's voice was steel now. And now you're going to hear the other side. The actual truth, not the version you've been given. I'll expect you here within the hour. She hung up without waiting for confirmation. Turned to Wells. Captain, arrange a private conference room. Something neutral, not family quarters. This needs to be formal. And make sure it's recorded. Audio only. I want documentation of everything that's said. Ma'am. Wells hesitated. Recording a meeting with the king without his knowledge. That's potentially. Will be done anyway. Anne finished. This is too important to rely on memory or good faith recollections. If anyone objects afterward, they can take it up with me personally. Wells hesitated another moment, then nodded. Conference room 3. It's secure, soundproofed, and it has discrete recording capability. Perfect. Annie turned to Wright. You're coming too, Sergeant. You're a witness to what happened today. You'll need to give your account directly to the king. So there's no question about what occurred. No ambiguity that can be exploited later. Ma'am, I'm not sure protocol allows a guard to… Protocol. Anne's smile was sharp, humorless. Protocol is what got us into this mess. Protocol said Charlotte should accept whatever treatment she received from her step-grandmother, because maintaining family harmony is more important than a child's well-being. Protocol said guards shouldn't question members of the royal family, even when something's obviously wrong. Well, I'm done with protocol. Today we do what's right instead of what's convenient." She looked at each of them in turn. "Kate, William, Wells, Wright. Here's what's going to happen. Charles will arrive. Camilla will be with him. They'll expect apologies. They'll expect this to be smoothed over with some quiet conversations and vague commitments to communicate better. They'll expect us to handle this delicately and move on." Annie's eyes were hard as diamonds. "They're going to be disappointed, because tonight Camilla is going to answer for what she's done. Every incident, every manipulation, every time she made Charlotte feel small and frightened and responsible for problems she didn't create. All of it. And there will be consequences. Real consequences, not the usual palace response of quiet warnings that get forgotten in 3 weeks. And if Charles won't listen," William asked quietly, "then he'll learn something about his daughter, his son, and his sister." Anne's voice was soft but absolutely certain that we protect our children first. Above everything else, crown, image, family unity, public perception, institutional preservation, their safety and well-being comes first. And if he can't accept that, then we'll have a much larger conversation about what this family actually stands for. She checked her watch. 45 minutes until Charles arrives. Let's make sure we have every piece of evidence ready. Camera footage, radio transcripts, Charlotte's statement, guard observations. All of it organized and irrefutable. "And Sterling?" Wright asked. "The king's secretary is waiting to see me. Let him wait," Anne said dismissively. "Better yet, bring him to the conference room. I want him to hear this too. The more witnesses, the harder this is to deny or minimize later." Wells moved immediately to organize everything. Kate and William returned to stay with Charlotte, to reassure her that she'd done the right thing in speaking up, that no one was angry with her. Anne stood in the corridor for a moment, looking at Wright with an expression that might have been respect. "You know your career might not survive this," she said bluntly. "Even if we prove everything, even if Camilla faces consequences. You challenged the Queen Consort, defied her direct orders. Some people will never forgive that. They'll see you as insubordinate, a problem, someone who doesn't understand their place in the hierarchy." "I know, ma'am." "And you'd do it again?" Wright thought about Charlotte's small hand gripping his sleeve, her frightened eyes. That emergency signal, 2 taps to the earlobe, casual and desperate at the same time. The sound of her crying behind the door. "Without hesitation, ma'am." Annie smiled. A real smile this time, reaching her eyes. "Good. We need more people like you. People who understand that duty means protecting the vulnerable, not protecting the powerful from accountability. Now let's go make sure what you did today actually matters." The conference room was ready. The recording equipment was set up, invisible but active. The evidence was compiled, footage queued up, transcripts printed, timelines documented. And in less than an hour, King Charles III would walk through that door expecting one conversation. He was going to get a very different one. King Charles III arrived at 7:45 p.m., earlier than expected, which suggested either urgency or anxiety or both. He came through the private entrance, Camilla beside him, both wearing expressions of controlled concern, the practiced look of people who believed they were coming to handle an unfortunate misunderstanding, to smooth over some minor incident that had been blown out of proportion by overprotective parents or overzealous security. They weren't prepared for what they found. Conference Room 3 wasn't large. Intimate, really. A round table designed for exactly this kind of difficult family conversation. 8 chairs arranged in a circle. No throne, no head of the table, no built-in hierarchy. Just people sitting at eye level with each other, equal in this space regardless of titles or succession. Annie sat at what might have been considered the power position, facing the door. Kate and William to her right, presenting a united front. Captain Wells and Wright to her left, the protection detail that had initiated all of this. Geoffrey Sterling, the king's private secretary, sat near the door with a notebook, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes sharp. The look of someone who understood he was witnessing something significant. The recording equipment ran silently in the corner, a small red light indicating it was active, though positioned where it wouldn't be immediately visible to someone entering the room. Charles paused in the doorway, his eyes sweeping the room, taking in the arrangement, the formality, the witnesses, the unmistakable sense that this was not a casual family chat. This seems rather formal. His voice carried a note of uncertainty, of a man realizing the situation wasn't what he'd been led to expect. "Sit down, Charles." Anne's voice was flat, not rude but completely devoid of the social deference usually shown to a king, even by his own sister. "Both of you." Camilla's eyes swept the room, landing on Wright. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by something cold and calculating. "I see we're including staff in family discussions now." Her tone managed to be both pleasant and dismissive, the implication clear that Wright's presence was inappropriate, that this was above his station. "Sergeant Wright is here as a witness," Anne said evenly, "since he was directly involved in today's incident, as is Captain Wells. This isn't a family discussion. It's a formal inquiry into what happened to Charlotte this afternoon, and why it happened, and what's been happening for weeks that we were all apparently too busy or too blind to notice." "Into what exactly?" Charles took his seat slowly, his movements cautious. Camilla remained standing, her posture rigid. "Sit down," Anne repeated. Still no inflection, just certainty, the kind of calm, absolute authority that came from knowing you were completely in the right, and having no doubt about it. Camilla sat. Her movements were controlled, graceful, but Wright saw the tension in her shoulders, the calculation in her eyes as she assessed the room, the witnesses, the situation she was walking into. Anne opened a folder in front of her, the gesture deliberate. 6 weeks ago, Camilla began what she called mentoring sessions with Princess Charlotte, private conversations about royal duty, public behavior, family responsibility. "Is that correct?" Charles frowned, glancing at Camilla. "Camilla has been helping Charlotte understand her role. What's wrong with that? She's been generous with her time, offering guidance that—" "What's wrong?" Anne interrupted, pulling out a transcript, "is that these sessions included telling Charlotte that speaking up about problems would damage the family, that complaining about treatment, even inappropriate treatment, was selfish and attention-seeking, that her primary duty was to maintain appearances regardless of how she felt." "That's not what I said." Camilla's voice was smooth, reasonable, the tone of someone being unfairly accused. "I was teaching her about discretion, about understanding that royal life requires certain sacrifices, that we all have to do things we don't particularly want to because duty requires it." "She's 8 years old," Kate cut in, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. "She shouldn't be learning to accept mistreatment as a sacrifice. She shouldn't be learning that her feelings don't matter, that speaking up makes her selfish. No one mistreated her." Camilla turned to Charles, her expression one of patient exasperation. "Darling, this is being blown completely out of proportion. Charlotte misunderstood some conversations. Children do that. They hear what they want to hear. They interpret correction as criticism. Then explain this." Anne pushed a tablet across the table. The security footage was queued up, ready to play. Wells pressed play. The silent video showed Charlotte walking alone, Camilla following. The chase, the confrontation near the library. Charlotte's visible fear, her flinch when Camilla touched her shoulder. Charles watched, his expression unreadable. When the footage ended, Camilla shrugged delicately, as if this proved nothing. "I was correcting her posture. She'd been slouching all day. It's important that she maintains proper bearing in public spaces. I touched her shoulder to remind her to stand properly. A gentle correction, nothing more." "She flinched," William said quietly. "Dangerously quiet. The kind of quiet that preceded explosions. She was startled. I came up behind her. Of course she flinched slightly." Annie pulled out another document. "This is Charlotte's statement, taken 2 hours ago, in her own words without prompting or leading questions." "Would you like me to read it?" "I don't think that's necessary," Charles began, but Anne continued as if he hadn't spoken. "I do." Anne's eyes were steel. "Charlotte says that 3 weeks ago, Camilla told her she was becoming difficult, that good princesses don't question instructions from senior royals, that if Charlotte couldn't be trusted to follow directions without argument, perhaps she wasn't ready for public duties. And wouldn't that disappoint her parents? Wouldn't that make everything harder for everyone?" "Context matters," Camilla said, her voice still reasonable but developing an edge. Charlotte had refused to wear the dress chosen for her for a public appearance. She was being stubborn, argumentative. I was teaching her that sometimes we do things we don't prefer because… She was 8 years old, choosing between a blue dress and a pink dress, Kate interrupted, her composure finally cracking completely. That's not a constitutional crisis. That's not a lesson in duty. That's a child expressing a normal preference. And you made her feel like her preference was wrong, like having an opinion about what she wore made her difficult and disobedient. And you wonder why she's becoming difficult. Camilla's mask slipped slightly, irritation bleeding through. You coddle these children. You let them think their feelings matter more than their duties. Someone needs to teach them reality. Someone needs to prepare them for the fact that this life requires sacrifice and compromise and putting aside childish wants. Their feelings do matter more than their duties, William said, his voice cutting like a blade. They're children, not symbols, not props, not miniature adults who should suppress their emotions for public consumption. Children, and they deserve to have their childhood protected, not stripped away by someone who thinks preparation means crushing normal development. Camilla turned to Charles, her expression shifting to one of wounded dignity. Are you going to let them speak to me this way? Charles was quiet, still watching the frozen image on the tablet. Charlotte's frightened face, the flinch, the body language of a child who'd learned to fear the person touching her. Anna continued, relentless. 2 weeks ago, Charlotte developed a sudden stomach illness right before a scheduled appearance. Do you remember that? Children get sick, Camilla said dismissively. It happens. It's unfortunate but not suspicious. She wasn't sick. Anne's voice was flat, certain. She was terrified, because you told her that morning that her behavior at the previous event had been embarrassing, that people were talking, that she'd made the family look bad by waving too enthusiastically at a crowd. I was preparing her for criticism, Camilla insisted. The press notices everything. She needs to learn that her actions have consequences, that people judge. She's 8, Kate repeated, her voice breaking slightly. She's 8 years old, and you made her believe she'd humiliated her family because she waved too enthusiastically at people who came to see her. You made her so anxious that she made herself physically ill, rather than risk disappointing you again. The room went silent. Even Sterling stopped writing, his pen frozen on the page. Charles finally spoke, his voice quiet. Camilla, is that true? I was teaching her restraint, Camilla said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Royal children need to learn control. They need to understand that. Is it true? Charles's voice was harder now, cutting through her explanation. Did you tell our granddaughter that her natural, age-appropriate behavior at a public event was embarrassing? Camilla's jaw tightened. She needed guidance. No one else was providing it. You're all so concerned with their happiness that you're forgetting they have responsibilities, that they represent institutions larger than themselves. They have childhoods, Anne said, each word precisely articulated, which they deserve to have without being emotionally manipulated by someone who should be protecting them, without being made to feel that their value is contingent on perfect behavior, without learning that love and acceptance come with conditions. Manipulated? Camilla stood abruptly, her composure shattering completely. I have done nothing but try to help these children understand what's expected of them. If Charlotte can't handle basic criticism, if she runs crying to guards because she's corrected, that's not my fault. That's poor parenting. That's raising children too soft for the roles they'll have to fill. She gave an emergency distress signal. Wright spoke for the first time, his voice calm but firm. All eyes turned to him. Princess Charlotte used the nonverbal signal that specifically means, I am in immediate danger. She was frightened enough to do that in her own home. To signal a guard she barely knows because she didn't feel safe with you. She was confused. She wasn't confused. Wright kept his voice respectful but unyielding. I've worked with royal children for 6 years. I've seen confusion. I've seen misunderstandings. I've seen children upset because they were disciplined or didn't get their way. This wasn't that. Princess Charlotte was afraid. Genuinely, viscerally afraid. Of you. How dare you? Camilla turned on him, her face flushing with anger. You're a guard. You stand where you're told and follow orders. You don't get to make judgments about your betters. You don't get to analyze my relationship with my step-granddaughter, and he gets to protect the people under his watch. Anne cut in sharply. That's literally his job. That's the only job that matters in situations like this. And today he did it. While you were trying to take custody of a frightened child who just signaled for help, he stood between you and her. He protected her, which is what should have been happening all along. I was taking her to her music lesson. You were taking her somewhere she didn't want to go, Anne interrupted. Somewhere she was afraid to go. Why? What were you planning to do with her once you got her alone? Another lesson about proper behavior? Another conversation about how her feelings don't matter? Another reminder that speaking up causes problems? This is insane. Camilla looked at Charles desperately. Are you hearing this? They're accusing me of what exactly? Being too strict? Teaching proper behavior? Trying to prepare Charlotte for the realities of royal life? We're approaching the final moments of this story. Stay with us until the end. Now, here's what happened next. Charles set down the tablet with deliberate care. Captain Wells, you've reviewed all security footage from the past 6 weeks? Yes, Your Majesty. Wells consulted his notes. 17 documented instances of Queen Camilla seeking out Princess Charlotte for private conversations. All occurred when Princess Charlotte's parents were away or occupied with other duties. Conversations lasted between 15 and 30 minutes on average. And Charlotte's behavior during these encounters? Wells chose his words carefully. Initially neutral, sir. By week 3, avoidant. Princess Charlotte began altering her routes through the palace to avoid areas where Queen Camilla might be. By week 5, she was exhibiting clear anxiety responses when informed of scheduled time with Queen Camilla. Charles closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something fundamental had shifted in his expression. Camilla, step outside, please. What? Camilla stared at him, disbelief written across her face. Charles, you can't possibly believe. Outside. Now, Charles, these people are. I said outside. His voice was quiet but carried absolute finality. Camilla stared at him for a long moment. Disbelief shifted to anger, then to calculation, then to something that might have been genuine fear. She stood slowly, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. You're all going to regret this, she said quietly, looking at each of them in turn. This family destroys anyone who threatens its image. I should know, and right now you're threatening decades of careful reputation management, of rebuilding public trust. You're willing to sacrifice all of that because a child misunderstood some conversations? We're willing to protect that child, William said quietly, whatever it costs, whatever it takes, always. Camilla walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle, looking back at Charles. When this blows up, and it will blow up, remember that I warned you. Remember that I tried to prepare you for the consequences of indulging children who should be learning duty. The door closed behind her with controlled force. Not quite a slam, but close enough to convey fury. Charles sat in silence for a long moment, his hands flat on the table, his breathing deliberately steady. He looked older suddenly, the weight of everything settling on his shoulders visibly. My granddaughter was frightened in her own home. His voice was rough, strained. She was frightened enough to signal a guard for help, and no one, not her parents, not her protection detail, not me, noticed. How did we not notice? No one spoke. The question hung in the air, unanswerable because the answer was too painful. They hadn't noticed because they'd been busy, because Charlotte had been trained to hide her discomfort, because Camilla had been careful, systematic, doing nothing so obvious that it would trigger immediate concern. She was told not to tell, Kate said quietly, her voice thick with unshed tears. Repeatedly, consistently, she was told that speaking up would cause problems, that it would hurt us, that good princesses stay quiet, that her feelings mattered less than family harmony. Charles looked at his son, and something passed between them. Understanding, shared pain, the recognition that they'd failed in the most fundamental duty of protecting someone they loved. William, I want Camilla to have no private access to any of my children, William said, his voice steady and final. None. not without Kate or myself present. I want that documented officially in writing, and I want a formal investigation into whether this has affected George or Louis as well, whether there have been other incidents we don't know about done. Charles's agreement was immediate, without hesitation. He turned to Anne. What else? Formal apology to Charlotte, Anne said, her voice softening slightly now that she'd won the essential battle. From you and from Camilla. Public statement that children's welfare comes before royal image. And consequences for Mikla. Real consequences, not a quiet warning that gets forgotten in 3 weeks when the next crisis emerges. What kind of consequences? Restricted role in family events. No mentoring or private interactions with any royal children, without explicit parental supervision and consent. Mandatory therapy, actual professional therapy with someone who specializes in family dynamics and appropriate boundaries. Not a palace-approved counselor who'll tell her what she wants to hear. Anne paused. And a clear understanding that if anything like this happens again, anything that makes a child afraid or unsafe, she'll be removed from family activities entirely. No exceptions. No second chances. Charles was quiet, wrestling visibly with the implications. King versus grandfather. Institution versus family. The same conflict that had plagued royals for generations. The eternal tension between duty and humanity. The people expect. He began. I don't care what the people expect, Anne said flatly. I care what Charlotte needs, what George and Louis need, what every child in this family needs. To feel safe, to know their feelings matter, to understand that love doesn't come with conditions. That's more important than managing public perception. Charles met her eyes. You're asking me to publicly discipline my wife. I'm asking you to protect your grandchildren. Anne's voice was gentle now, but unyielding. That's what grandfathers do. It's what kings should do. Sometimes those duties align. Sometimes they conflict. This is one of those times when you have to choose. The room was silent. Sterling had stopped even pretending to take notes, his eyes fixed on Charles's face as the king processed the impossible position he'd been placed in. Finally, I'll make arrangements. Charles's voice was quiet but certain. Not good enough. Anne leaned forward. I need your word, Charles. Your word as their grandfather, not as king. Your word that Charlotte, that all of them, will be protected. Even if it's uncomfortable. Even if it causes headlines. Even if Camilla objects. Even if it costs you personally. Charles was silent for a long moment. Then, you have my word. As their grandfather, as your brother. They will be protected, whatever it takes. Anne nodded slowly, satisfied. Then we're done here. For now, the meeting ended. Charles left first, walking slowly, looking older than when he'd arrived. The weight of difficult conversations still to come visible in his posture. Kate and William returned immediately to Charlotte, to reassure her, to begin the slow process of rebuilding the trust that had been damaged. Wells began organizing the formal documentation, the official reports that would make all of this real and permanent and actionable. Wright stood in the corridor, still processing the fact that he'd just witnessed a king promise to discipline his queen, that he'd seen Princess Anne face down both of them without flinching, that he'd watched parents fight for their child against centuries of protocol and tradition and carefully managed images. Annie appeared beside him, her footsteps soft on the carpeted floor. You'll receive a formal commendation, she said without preamble. It'll be private. No ceremony, no photographs, nothing public. But it'll go in your permanent file. For whatever that's worth in the career you'll have after this. It's worth enough, ma'am. Wright meant it. Some things mattered more than recognition. Camilla will never forgive you. Anne's voice was matter-of-fact, not warning but simply stating reality. You know that? She'll remember your name. Remember what you did. And if she ever has the opportunity to make things difficult for you. I know, ma'am. Can you live with it? Wright thought about Charlotte's small hand on his sleeve, her frightened eyes seeking safety, that emergency signal, the sound of her crying behind the door when she finally felt safe enough to release everything she'd been holding in. Easily, ma'am. Annie smiled. A real smile this time, warm and genuine and approving. Good answer. Now go home. Get some sleep. You've had a hell of a day. She walked away, leaving Wright alone in the corridor. His shift had officially ended 4 hours ago. He was exhausted, his body aching with the kind of weariness that came after sustained stress and tension. His career had probably peaked and plateaued in the same afternoon. He'd never advance beyond his current position, never be trusted with more prominent assignments, would always be the guard who'd defied the queen consort. He'd made a powerful enemy, someone with resources and influence and a long memory for slights. And he'd do it all again without hesitation. 3 days later, Wright was back on duty. Regular rotation, same posts, same responsibilities. On the surface, nothing had changed. The palace continued its usual rhythms. Tours proceeded. Events happened. The machinery of monarchy ground on as it had for centuries. But everything had changed. Charlotte walked past his station that afternoon. Kate was with her, walking hand in hand. Officer Davies trailed behind at proper distance, and Wright noted that Davies had been replaced on Charlotte's regular detail. Temporary reassignment during the investigation into why he'd lost track of her that day. Charlotte looked different. The tension that had lived in her shoulders for weeks was gone. She held her head higher, walked with more confidence. The weight had lifted. She saw Wright. Recognition sparked in her eyes. Then she did something unexpected. Instead of walking past with the usual brief nod that protocol demanded, she walked directly over to him. "Good afternoon, Your Royal Highness." Wright maintained proper protocol, standing at attention. "Good afternoon, Sergeant Wright." Charlotte's voice was clear, strong, no tremor, no fear. "I wanted to say thank you for the other day." "You're welcome, ma'am. Just doing my job." It was more than that. Charlotte glanced at her mother. Kate nodded permission, smiling slightly. Charlotte stepped closer, lowering her voice. "My mum says you were brave, that you did what was right even when it was hard, even when you were afraid. Your mother is very kind, ma'am. She says that's what real guards do." Charlotte's eyes were serious, intent. Protect people, even when they're scared, even when other people tell them not to. Wright crouched down to Charlotte's level, matching her height. "Can I tell you something, Your Royal Highness?" Charlotte nodded. "I was scared that day, when I decided to help you. I thought I might lose my job. I thought people would be very angry with me." He met her eyes directly. "But you know what I learned?" "What?" "Some things matter more than being scared. Some things are worth the risk. And making sure you were safe, making sure you felt protected and heard and believed, was one of those things. Will always be one of those things." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears this time. Relief and gratitude and the beginning of healing. "Thank you, Sergeant Wright. You're very welcome. Your Royal Highness, you were very brave too, speaking up when you were afraid. That takes real courage." Charlotte rejoined her mother. They walked on together, and Wright watched them go. Kate looked back once, catching his eye, mouthed 2 words. "Thank you," he nodded. No other words needed. The formal report came through later that week. Camilla would be taking a reduced role in family events for the foreseeable future due to scheduling conflicts and personal commitments. Private interactions with young royals would be supervised. The official statement was vague, carefully worded to avoid specifics that would invite press speculation. Everyone who mattered knew the truth. Wright never saw the aftermath firsthand. That happened behind closed doors, in private conversations and family meetings and therapy sessions. The slow, difficult work of repairing trust and establishing boundaries. The painful discussions about what had happened and why, and how to prevent it from happening again. But he saw the results. Charlotte gradually returned to her normal self. The weight lifted, the fear gone. She walked through palace corridors with confidence again, smiled genuinely during public events, laughed with her brothers, without that edge of anxiety that had crept into her behavior. George and Louis were quietly evaluated as well. No serious issues found, but preventative measures put in place anyway. Clear protocols. Explicit permission required for private time with any adult family member. Open communication encouraged. Parental supervision enforced. Princess Anne attended more family gatherings, her presence serving as silent reminder of what happened when children weren't protected, when protocol mattered more than well-being. And Wright continued his duties. Same job, same responsibilities, but with something new. respect from colleagues who'd heard what happened, whispered conversations in break rooms, quiet nods in corridors, the unspoken acknowledgement that he'd done something difficult and necessary, the knowledge that when it mattered most, he'd chosen right over easy, safety over silence, courage over fear. 6 months later, Wright received his formal commendation. Private ceremony as Anne had promised. Just Captain Wells, Princess Anne, and Kate present. No press, no photographs, no public recognition. Just a brief citation recognizing exceptional judgment and dedication to royal protection duties. Anne shook his hand, her grip firm. Still think you made the right choice? Every day, ma'am. Good. Because we need people who will make that choice, who'll put children first when everyone else is worried about appearances. She paused. Don't let this be the last time you speak up when something's wrong. The institution needs voices like yours. People who remember that duty means protecting the vulnerable, not protecting the comfortable. I won't, ma'am. True duty isn't about following orders blindly. It's about knowing when rules matter less than doing what's right. It's about protecting the vulnerable even when it costs you something. It's about choosing truth over comfort, safety over silence, courage over fear. Sergeant Thomas Wright learned that lesson in a palace corridor, with a frightened child's hand gripping his sleeve. A child who trusted him to see her distress and act on it when everyone else was too busy, or too blind, or too invested in maintaining comfortable fictions. He never forgot it. The guards who serve the royal family are more than ceremonial fixtures. They're more than the stoic figures tourists photograph. They're the last line of defense between power and those who might abuse it. They're the ones who see what happens behind closed doors, who notice when something's wrong, who have to decide in critical moments whether protocol matters more than protection. Usually, they choose protocol. That's what they're trained to do. That's what the system rewards. But sometimes, when it really matters, they choose courage instead. And that makes all the difference. If this story showed you something about royal guards you didn't know, make sure you're subscribed to Crown Watch. We share these untold stories from inside the palace every single day. Drop a comment. Would you have done what Sergeant Wright did if your career was on the line? We'll see you in the next one.